Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here in this Mexico Los Angeles 2017 the Creative Economy Forum. I really want to thank CalArts Institute and the Mexican Consulate here in Los Angeles for the invitation. When I received that invitation early this year, there were basically two reasons why I said, yes, I want to go there. The first one had to do with the need that I perceive about reinforcing the links and friendship between the U.S. and Mexico. I think the earlier part of the year, we had a shock in our bilateral relationship that I thought it was important to just come to Los Angeles, to California, and make a statement about how important it is, the network, the relationship between the two communities. So that was one of the first reasons. I'm a true believer in bridges rather than walls, so that's why I'm here. The second reason has to do with a more personal point of view. I'm a grad student from UCLA, so I spent 5 of my best years here in Los Angeles. And in fact, my eldest son was born here in Los Angeles, so I'm a father of an Angelino. So that brings myself also to a very close to my heart into this city. So, I mean, I couldn't miss this in any case. So that's why I'm here. And I was asked to talk about how to measure, how do we value, how do we stand up to the creative economy. And in order to do that, I prepared a slide presentation, which is already there. And let me just tell you a little bit about these things. As you read from my bio, I worked for the National Institute of Statistics and Geography. So as a statistician, we really have to go into very robust methodologies and very strict measurement into what we can count. In order to talk about this thing, if we go to the next slide, please. I want to talk to you about the national accounts. The national accounts is the backbone of our economic measurement of what happens in an economy. And I won't go over all the details on these things, just remember that in the center of everything is what we used to call the GDP, the gross domestic product, and all related accounts into that. That has to do with production and expenditure and an economy. Now with that overall framework, we have produced, as many other statistical offices around the world, several satellite accounts. So highlighted in red is what we call the cultural satellite account for Mexico. If we go to the next slide, please. Now that part is very challenging because we want to measure the most important macroeconomic aggregates, that is the big numbers around culture. And this implies that we have to first identify all economic flows within and without the production boundary, and then assign them a value, a dollar sign for each of these flows, which is not very easy. The next slide, please. Now, as statisticians, we need some order in order to measure. We need to know what we're going to measure before we start measuring. So, in this respect, we have to start with some conceptual framework. At least today, but I'm assuming that yesterday as well, most of the time we've been using interchangeably creative economy and cultural economy. So this may be related or similar concepts, but at some point we have to draw a border and make sure what we're trying to measure. So in the statistics community, we do have some kind of international standards and handbooks that attempt to define and set the what the limits of the cultural sector is. So we have some definitions and proposals by UNESCO, from UNCTAD, from the World Intellectual Property Organization, and so on and so forth. So there is some suggestions at the international level of what comprises the cultural sector that we want to measure as a statistician. Now, taking that into account, if we go to the next slide, in Mexico, we form a technical working group with national institutions, both at the government level, where we have now it's the Ministry of Culture, but at that time it was just a council, the Institute of Beautiful Arts, or IMBA, and Instituto de Arqueología e Historia. And in the academic sector, we did engage with several universities, such as UNAM, la Universidad Metropolitana, Autónoma Metropolitana, where I'm very glad that Eduardo Cruz is here and participated one way or another, Instituto Politécnico, and ICHAN. In the end, we have to come up with a definition. So if we go to the next slide, we ended up with this definition. What is the economic sector of culture? It's the set of products and social activities based on creative and symbolic aspects which are transformed into goods and services through a process of creation, production, transmission, consumption, preservation, and formation. So that's basically what we want to measure. If we go to the next slide. Now, with that definition, we went to the national accounts and see what information do we have that basically falls within that category. And we ended up with several of activities that are shown in this slide. So we have performance arts and shows, plastic arts and photography, handicrafts and traditional toys, which is very important in Mexico, retail or trade, designer and creative services, books, printing and press, audiovisual media, music and concerts, material and natural heritage, which is not obvious, but we consider that to be also part of the cultural sector, and household cultural production, which is a lot of non-remunerated activities that households do by themselves outside of the production boundary, but nevertheless they produce some kind of culture, as well as a lot of public involvement in both different levels of government in the provision and production of culture. If we go to the next slide, please. Now, here are some of the examples of what is and what is not that we are including in this satellite account. So, for instance, if we are producing a concert, that's included. But if we're just singing in the shower, that's not included. So if we buy books and newspapers or some music online, that's included. But if we're playing an instrument at home, that's not included. So if you can see, there's a narrow boundary here that we have to draw at some point in order to come up with an economic value of these things. And it's very difficult when you have a home production. So in that respect, we have to measure, for instance, what are the services that we provide as volunteers, for instance, in religious feasts. So Semana Santa and many other activities are also part of culture and important in Mexico. So that's basically the overall conceptual frameworks. So let me go to the results. If we go one slide, please, and the other one, the next one. So basically, these are the main numbers. So for 2014, the latest estimation that we have, Mexico's cultural GDP was around almost $31 billion, or equal to 2.8% of Mexico's GDP. The most important contribution came actually from households, with around 21% of all activities, followed closely by handicrafts and traditional toys, which are, as I said, important in our own country as means of subsistence and other things. But retail and other kinds of trade account for 16%, and audiovisual media for 15%, and so on and so forth. How does that compare to other activities? Let's go to the next slide, please. Well, the cultural sector is almost as light as general freight trucking or as a transportation, the manufacturing of transportation equipment. So it's pretty large by our own standards. It's greater than air transportation in our national accounts. Perhaps even more importantly, next slide, is the number of jobs that are created. And Bruce has already said some of these numbers for California. As you can see here, in the case of Mexico in 2014, we identify more than 1 million jobs created by all these activities that we put together into the culture sector. Most of those come from performance and arts and household and retail, but also in government activities. Now, to conclude my presentation, let me bring an international comparison in the last slide, please. Now, how does that compare? I mean, according to the numbers that we were able to gather, there are certain countries, such as the United States or Australia, where the cultural GDP accounts for more than 4% of total GDP. But we are in the highest ranges for Latin America, where, for instance, Costa Rica is around 2.2% of GDP, or Chile 1.6% of GDP. We're even higher than Spain, according to this publication, where it's around 2.5% of GDP. So let me, if you go to the last slide, please, let me conclude by saying that one important element of this satellite account is that we're not trying to measure welfare. That's very important, or well-being. That's a completely different concept that statisticians are only starting to think about. We're still within the old framework of national accounts. We're stuck, basically, or confined to the concepts of production and expenditure, including international trade and government expenditures, and so on and so forth. So I will leave it at here and hope that you will have some further questions down the road. Thank you.